Vietnam gained its independence in 1954 from France, but after the war, the Geneva Accords split the country of Vietnam temporarily into two nations at the 17th parallel, with Ngo Diem, the non-communist leader in the south, and Ho Chi Minh, the communist leader in the north. An election was to be held in 1956 for the country to vote for either leader, but because Diem was so unpopular, the election was cancelled. The North then realized the only way to unify Vietnam was through military action, so therefore the Viet Cong, a communist military group loyal to the North and stationed in the South, formed. From 1960 through 1963, JFK sent supplies, money, and military advisors to the South Democratic government. When JFK died and Johnson took over the presidency, he set up the Tonkin Gulf Incident in order to establish a reason to intervene in Vietnam. After a series of attacks on the Americans in Vietnam, Johnson made the decision to start escalating the war.
The U.S. planes dropped napalm, a gasoline-based chemical that burned the forests of Vietnam. The American planes also dropped Agent Orange, a harsh leaf-killing chemical that destroyed the forest and wildlife. The U.S. Armed Forces were also found guilty of torturing captured prisoners and innocent civilians. The first march took place on December 1, 1964 on Washington, which, although it was only 25,000 people, it was the largest anti-war march in history. The decision to induce the Selective Service Act increased levels of protest as well. People considered it an attack on their rights to decide for themselves whether they wanted to fight for their country. David Miller, a well-known protester, publicly burned his draft card and was sentenced to 2.5 years of prison. Many ethnic groups and minorities also felt strongly about Vietnam. One of the reasons was that all the money was going into Vietnam. Johnson had to increase taxes and lower funds for programs to deal with poverty. Most of the people fighting in war were either the lower class or African Americans because the wealthier classes were able to avoid the war by college deferment. As the protests progressed, people needed a medium to voice their opinion and get the attention of others. They turned to music and created anti-war music of the Vietnam era that took the children of the 60s to a different level. These soldiers that came back from the war early exposed the lies of the government and the reality of the failing situation in Vietnam. Knowing the government had kept this from them, protesters had even more motivation to make music and spread their message to others in the country as well as around the world. Although the music component was important, the power in the message was the main point. It was mostly people under the age of 30 who participated in the protest, as they had stronger emotions of fear and anger. However, song worked well to grab the attention of people of all ages since they are played all over and have catchy melodies. Because of these factors, it was more effective than any speeches. Altogether, anti-war music united the country under an urgent cause and gave people the opportunity to voice their opinions and release their strong emotions about the Vietnam War.
Dodger Rag by Pete Singer starts off by talking about the experiences that the soldiers felt from being drafted into the war to their actual experiences in combat. The narrator in the song is just a typical American boy who believes in stopping communism. For example, in the first line of the song, it talks about the Red Scare, saying that the boys wanted to keep Castro down, and I knew better than men. Here in the song, the boy supports Johnson's decision to escalate into war. But when he himself gets drafted, his attitude changes, and he starts to make excuses why he doesn't want to go. A way to avoid the draft was to get a college deferment. However, the boy says he isn't going to college. Instead, he seeks a medical excuse, claiming that, quote, I got eyes like a bat, my feet are flat, and my asthma is getting worse. Next, once actually in Vietnam, the narrator, along with many other soldiers, starts to lose their morale. The lack of progress and frustration with the southern Vietnamese government made some of the boys turn to alcohol and drugs, which is clear in this song when it says, quote, I'm addicted to 1,000 drugs. Next, the song addresses the horrible conditions of the war when it says, I've got a dislocated disc and a racked up back, and, quote, I'm allergic to flowers and bugs, and when bombshells hit, I get epileptic fits. And lastly, the narrator concludes with his hate for the gruesomeness and bloodiness of the war, and says that if there's ever a war without blood and gore, quote, I'll be the first to go. The song Draft Dodger Rag summarizes a typical American's boy's experience in Vietnam. It starts off with the process of being drafted, leads to the horrible conditions of Vietnam, and finally ends with the hate many of the soldiers felt towards the brutality of the war. The deeper meaning of the song is the capturing of the soldiers' despair that they felt for the war and their little motivation that they had when it came to actually killing and fighting. An example of this is when the narrator says, quote, that someone's got to go over there, but that someone isn't me, a line that reflects the soldier's little motivation. So not only does this song capture the horrible physical conditions of the war, but also underlines the mental struggles the soldiers went under as well. Another song that captures Americans' frustration of the Vietnam War is Send the Marines by Tom Lether. By using sarcasm, Lether depicts the war to be an event where the U.S. simply sends in troops to enforce their democratic values. The song is making fun of the U.S.'s imperialism behavior of sending in Marines when it is not even the U.S.'s war to fight. For example, in the beginning of the song, the line, quote, "When someone makes a move of which we don't approve, who is that always intervenes? UN and OAS, and of course, send the Marines," addresses the singer's negative feelings towards the continuous actions of the U.S. military. This attitude about the U.S.'s tendency to constantly send Marines continues through the rest of the song. The song makes a reference to the Civil War, saying, "Remember those exciting fighting scenes to the shores of Tripoli, but not to Mississippi," which recognizes that the U.S. will send troops halfway across the world, but not in their own country. The song then starts to focus on Vietnam and talks about the U.S.'s imperialistic actions there. The U.S. was trying to establish a democratic government in southern Vietnam, and this is recognized in the song when it says, quote, "We send the Marines for might makes right until they've seen the light. They've got to be protected and all the rights respected till someone we like can be elected." Lastly, the singer talks about the aggressions of war. The U.S. wants to be seen as an idolized nation by others with peaceful success. However, it does not live up to this reputation with its aggressive war tactics and invasive imperialistic policy. In conclusion, Tom Lether uses sarcasm to display the opinion that the U.S. sends in Marines too frequently and without good reason to enforce U.S. values.
Both of these songs discuss the presence of Marines in Vietnam. However, Send the Marines focuses on the U.S. and the singer's attitude towards imperialism, while Draft Dodger Rag focuses on the soldiers' struggles in the war. However, both songs criticize the U.S. and its decisions to go to war and the ineffectiveness of sending large amounts of troops. In Draft Dodger Rag, while it says that communism needs to be stopped, it is clear that the singer does not believe that soldiers are the solution. This is clear to the singer's constant recognition of the soldiers' struggles at war. The line, "I got eyes like a bat, and my feet are flat, and my asthma is getting worse," is an example of these struggles. While Draft Dodger Rag focuses more on these hardships of the soldiers, Send the Marines addresses the United States using troops to solve their problems. The singer emphasizes that the U.S.'s tendency to aggressively take over other countries and not make peace like they claim, but instead harshly imposing their values. By saying they'd rather kill them off by peaceful means, the U.S. is being sarcastic since there's nothing peaceful in killing. In conclusion, Draft Dodger Rag focuses on the Marines themselves and their experiences in the horrible conditions in Vietnam, while Send the Marines focuses on the tendency of the U.S. to send in troops and enforce their values. While both songs attack Johnson's decision to escalate the war, Draft Dodger Rag is a more effective song to do so. The focus on soldiers' journey from being drafted to having to in the horrible Vietnam conditions would really bring anger out of people because they can relate to the narrator's story to a boy whom they knew and was drafted to Vietnam. This would hit a personal level with many and really provoke feelings of anger, which would result in a strive for change. Send the Marines might also provoke anger, but because the song focuses on imperialism, which is a less personal topic, Send the Marines would receive less of a result. Like many other eras, music during Vietnam served as a rally cry and a cause for action. However, in Vietnam, it was not just the music, but the message. The lyrics in the song brought out emotions of anger in people who had been numb to the war. This fear and anger that the songs provoked gave people a drive to do something about the war and to protest. The songs also served as a unifying factor among the people, creating a common communication among the diverse. Vietnam was significant in that there was a new generation with new ideals growing up. The young adults were already forming organizations like the Students for a Democratic Society. This young generation behind the protest music was the baby boom of World War II, who did not like the inequalities and exclusion of races, and the music reflected this belief. The music showed that in this time period, people who were not afraid to voice their opposition and that they were sick of fear of communism and the war mentality. Music served as a catalyst that united this generation in protests, and in particular the Vietnam War, and the war became a focus point and that all the different protest groups could rally behind. The war was claiming the lives of brothers, neighborhoods, and it was on every boy's tongues. Music and its message was so effective that because so many people believed that war was not the solution and the thought of traveling halfway across the world to fight a war for a cause and no defects on the soldiers was not worth dying for.